Hello. Testing that everyone can hear me. Nod. Yes, great. Thank you. Lovely. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jonathan Relf, and I'm here to talk to you this evening about going live, broadcasting your experience. It's an interesting topic for me because in a former career, I used to work for the BBC in Birmingham, and so therefore I have done broadcast to the nation stuff as well, which was interesting, especially when that is truly live. And so I'm going to be reflecting on how technology these days allows you to do an awful lot of this stuff in your own home, stuff that when I first joined the BBC back quite a few years ago, everything used to have to be in a massive television studio because cameras were insensitive and you needed a lot of light to make them work, and that's why you needed 70 people and spend a lot of time doing it. Now you've probably pretty much got something in your pocket that will allow you to broadcast whatever you're thinking about. So in many ways, broadcasting, going live has never been easier. There are an ever-increasing number of platforms trying to encourage you to share your hobbies, your pastimes, your skills, your passions. Most smartphones, in fact, the device you're probably watching the presentation on this evening has got sufficient capability in it to allow you to get on and do the act of getting online and broadcasting your experience. So the risk is, though, that there are an awful lot of people out there that make this look good, but it doesn't happen by accident. There's certainly the likes of Rhett and Link and Linus Tech Tips and Simone Geertz, and are all franchises that have grown to such a massive scale that they've got whole production companies behind them now. That doesn't mean to say that you have to, have all this equipment to get it done, but it just sometimes there is an undisclosed amount of time and effort that goes into things. And what I'm trying to do is present a methods of streamlining how you do this to actually mean that you don't get put off from even trying in the first place. So how do we find that balance? How do we know where we go between starting to share your hard-won experience, but also simplifying it so that your knowledge is accessible without you thinking, gosh, this is so much work to do. Why would I even bother? I've certainly found that even with blogging. So the idea of then moving on to doing podcasting or video production could also be that daunting for some people, and that's why maybe you've never tried it. But I'm here to encourage you and show you that this is simple and can be cheap. So let's start off with a very brief point. And I know there's been talks in the past at Tech Nottingham and other events you've probably attended about imposter syndrome, but let's not beat around the bush. You are brilliant. You have a lot of useful stuff that you know. So let's just assume that you get past your own your own doubts about whether anybody would want to hear you. I'm not going to dwell on this because I advise you to try it and do it for yourself. I mean, if there's anything that I've found in terms of documenting my own journey of knowledge, is I use it as a way of looking back about how I've learnt, and if anybody else finds it useful, that's just a bonus. So in some respects, leave yourself a breadcrumb of your own journey. Document your own journey. Even if you don't publish it, it's actually a worthwhile exercise just to remind you how far you've come. Little wins are worth celebrating. In an agile, constantly evolving workplace, it's often that the time to pause and celebrate is often skipped for moving on to the next thing. And in some ways, taking your time to step back and actually write down what you've done, how well you've done it, and what you learnt along the way, even if you didn't succeed, which we'll come to, it's worth doing it for even just yourself. But then there are those people out there that can benefit. You are at a certain stage of your journey, and yes, you might think, well, there are other people that are better than me, so why would I even bother? But there are going to be people at your level or with less experience that will benefit from hearing your personal take on it. And my favourite XKCD comic on this is the one about, never have I felt so... I love this one. Never have I felt so close to another soul and yet so helplessly alone as when I Google an error and there's one result, a thread by someone with the same problem and no answer, last posted in 2003. And then there, the infamous, who were you, Denver Coder 9? What did you see? And again, if you can help one person by sharing your experience, then surely this is worth considering. And in many ways, the sort of analogy really is if you've gone through that point of it's a bit Greek mythology, this almost, that the Theseus and the Minotaur kind of analogy, where you just say, well, you may be attempting to get to the center of the maze, and there may be things that get in your way, but still that journey of how you faced the challenges and either escaped, well, you've definitely escaped to tell the tale, even if you didn't win. It's worth getting online and telling people about it, because that journey is the interesting bit, not necessarily the destination. The destination you could probably look up in documentation, but the journey is the bit that we're all interested in. So what are we going to cover? We're going to briefly cover blogs, because it's an obvious starting point for most people. Then I've got a fair degree of experience with podcasting, and then recently we've been starting to do a lot more in video production, and that also loops back to my previous career, so I've been really enjoying doing that. So I'm going to take you through some of the pros and cons of how we do this. And in many ways, the way that normally you go about splitting down a problem is going through these basic 6 stages. You'll have the idea, you'll come up with a plan of how you want to actually do that, you'll record it in some manner. That also works for blogs, because that's just writing it down. You'll edit it to make it more condensed, publish it, and then distribute it. Now, the amount of time you spend on each of these stages depends on the type of content you're doing and who you're doing it with. Because you may, especially these days where it's so easy on the likes of, YouTube Live, TikTok and stuff, to just be able to get online, press a button, and you're streaming your thoughts. You may skip quite a few of these stages because you've got the idea in your head and you don't want to overcomplicate it. However, if you are starting to contribute or collaborate with guests or co-presenters, you need a time and a place to talk to somebody about it, especially if you're inviting guests on, then these things start to become a little bit more, formulas that you need to have to actually make planning your content and getting it out simpler. So ultimately, you're going to need a set of production systems, which is a term that I use to actually describe just the bullet points that you go through to say, right, here's a checklist of stuff that I do from end to end. There's a book called, I can't remember it now, Change the System? Yeah, I think, that describes, it doesn't matter what process that you've got ahead of you, write all the steps down, even if there's 74 of them, because then you can reflect on what you've written down to actually say, is this efficient? Is this actually something, can I automate some of this? And what I'm going to show you tonight is some of the ways that I've automated these to actually make it simpler, so that the act of publishing your knowledge isn't the thing that's stopping you. So let's start with blogs. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail because you've had previous talks about open web and indie web and blogging, and certainly with the likes of WordPress and Medium, it's dead easy these days to actually go out and get a blog. But it's where most people start, because you don't have to think about how you sound or how you look with a blog. It's just some words on a page. However, you may not also be that kind of wordsmith. You may prefer being a visual. I mean, certainly I'm a visual thinker, so I like using diagrams and visual aids. Not to say you can't do those on a blog, because clearly you can put diagrams on a blog. So an awful lot of people do start with blogs, and I think that they are still key in this portfolio, because you'll see how I make use of blogs later. So at the very least, the written word is still a good place to start to journal. Even if you decide to just keep those drafts private, still go through the act of actually writing down notes and doing it. But as I say, I'm not going to, this is not how to WordPress. So I'm just, I am effectively going to get to the meat and the interesting bit of this, which is more to do with my podcasting experience. So currently the thing that's taking most of my production time is the Agile Engineering podcast, which I help produce, along with Louise, Liam, Pete and Misha, 5 guests. So I previously had the pleasure of collaborating on a 4-person podcast with Tom Jepson, Jess White and Carl Barger, and that was the Book Club Pod Show. And it's great when you get people together in a room, because you can actually bounce ideas off each other, and it's good to have. That said, trying to get everybody in the same room is sometimes is the challenge with life. One brief nod before we go into into too much detail about this, I do want to give a quick shout out to my friend and mentor on podcasting, which is the fabulous Dave Lee, who is a podcaster himself and a Creative Commons champion. I will come on to Creative Commons in a bit. He is the co-host of the award-winning Bugcast podcast, which I thoroughly recommend, and he has his wife weekly. We're on to show something like 670 odd now, I think. So every week for the last 12 plus years, they've been streaming a show every Friday night live. Pretty amazing. So he was the person that really first off gave me, kept nudging me to to try podcasting and say, just give it a go. So much respect to him. He's also one of my shows is also part of a collaboration of podcasts called the Other Side Podcast Network. But quite a few of the ideas that I'm going to show next are inspired and have come from Dave. So I just wanted to give him a mention. So we're going to start off with the act of recording. Now, obviously, you've got, chances are this day and age, it's fairly safe to say that most people in the tech industry have got smartphones of some ilk, if not access to a computer or a laptop. So I started off with 4 simple stages of evolution of recording. Back in the day when we were still at in-person events, you might have seen me floating around with a microphone that I had from back. It's not the cheapest one, the Shure SM58, but it's also plugged into a fairly cheap preamplifier which was connected to my iPad. So a lot of the first bit of blogging that I was doing when I was interviewing people like Sean from the PHP community and others was just me and an iPad and a single mic. Not the greatest setup, but it worked. So you got a lot of room noise. But again, it should never be, your blocker should never be, oh, I've not got the right kit. Chances are your headset and your phone are great enough quality to actually record on and just get your thoughts out. So the voice recorder app on your phone is fine. Don't assume that you have to rush out and buy all the gear because that's not the case. Latterly after that, because I wanted to actually have a bit more control, I actually make use of, when I'm on the road now, the little small box to the left to the right of my laptop is a Zoom H5 recorder. That's got 4 channels, separate audio channels, and an SD card in it that I can record into. So that was really useful because I could then give each presenter their own microphone clip to themselves, and I got rid of a lot of the room noise. The thing about that, though, of course, is that I went and worked on a podcast with 5 presenters. So suddenly that became problematic because then one person either had to share or we had to record a separate audio feed. And then, of course, a pandemic happened, which was actually rather useful because it forced us to all be virtual. And so what we've ended up doing now is, for a long time, we started off recording ourselves on our own machines, and then each person's file would then be sent to us in Audacity, and then I would just line everybody's audio up, and then we'd have effectively a coherent show. It was great. The only problem is that if not everybody's recording with the same settings, particularly bitrate, then it can be challenging because one episode, Pete Gallagher's voice was stretched compared to everybody else's, and I kept having to splice bits out to try and make him sound coherent. So that wasn't much fun. So we've then since moved on to using a website called cleanfeed.net, which is brilliant because it allows you to invite guests into a room that you create and record the audio. The free version records it, mixes it down to a stereo mix, but the paid for version, which is not cheap, allows you to keep the files separate. But the idea is that you actually get a mix at the end of it that you can edit. So in terms of editing, well, I've already shown you one thing that I already edit in, which is free, which is Audacity, which is free to download, free to use, and cross-platform. Very good little editor. But chances are you've probably got one that came with your machine as well, or your mobile device, to be honest, because like with Apple, I've got access to GarageBand as well. That works just as well. So there is again, you don't have to spend money on editing tools because there are free ones out there, especially Audacity. So that's that. Then we move on to my favourite, which is paid at the moment, although you can get a free version at the moment. I'm slightly an addict to this software, which is a software called Descript. Now, Descript is amazing because it does text-to-speech. No, get that right around. Speech-to-text. So it does the detection of words from your audio. and then presents it to you as if it was a Word document that you were editing, a word processor. That means that your audio editing does not have to be a digital razor in waveforms like at the bottom. You might, you have to spend time working out which waveform is which word. With Descript, effectively, you can just cut sentences out, splice things together without having to think about how the audio gets done underneath that. Now, that speech to text does come with a cost to the processing, which is why we're actually paying for that at the moment. But even the free version comes with some free hours per month that you can play with. The pro version also has this rather spooky feature called overdub, which if you spend long enough talking at it and giving it a long enough sample of your voice with a disclaimer saying that you're okay with them sampling your voice, you can actually type text in and it will render your own voice from your own sample, and you can actually repair the audio if you miss something at the end of a recording, like you forgot to mention the website or something. You can just type that in, it goes and uses your overdub voice and magically renders it. So yeah, that's pretty good. But behind the scenes of all that is still the source audio, so you can still get to the individual tracks and see that the but what it does is it collapses all those individual tracks into a single script and a single timeline. And yeah, it just makes editing so much simpler because you are effectively just looking at the words. If you're looking to tell a story, if you're wanting your podcast episode to say succinctly, this is what I learnt and this is how I learnt it, then again, seeing the words on the page, super valuable. So I'd definitely recommend having a look at Descript, even if it's just the free download. So once you've got your audio captured, obviously the next step is to get it out there into the world. Now, publishing, often when you do a quick search for this, everyone will try and sell you podcast hosting space. But I want to show you a way of doing this for free, which 2 steps it goes through. One, I do often push my audio through this website called Auphonic, which is very useful because it's cleans up your audio. If you've got background hum, if you've got room noise, there's some magic processing in this software that you just upload your audio file to it and it cleans it, and it's very good. You do get 2 hours processing for free every month. You can pay for more. So again, if you're doing it infrequently, chances are the free version will suit you just fine. The second thing is where I host the audio for most of my podcasts, which is archive.org. Now, you may know archive.org for their Wayback Machine. If you've ever tried to find a website that's gone off the internet, or you want to see your own website in a previous version before you updated it, archive.org is taking a snapshot of the entire internet for scholarly reasons and make it available and searchable. Now, one of the side effects of this is that they do, as part of the Internet Archive, they do allow you to upload your own documents. So what I do is, because of the licensing agreement, which I'm going to come on to next, I push the audio files up to archive.org as part of a collection that I've created of my own audio. And they allow me to host that for free for doing that. So that means you don't need to think about where you're going to pay for storage. So that's super useful. But on that topic, Creative Commons was something I talked about earlier. Now, copyright, obviously everybody gets copyright of their own material, but there may be points where you actually say, I'm happy for other people to use my work. And Creative Commons gives you a framework for doing that with. So there are 4 stages to do with Creative Commons that you decide how you want your work to be licensed. Now, I tend to do mine, and I'll show you what I do, but let's explain the 4 basic points. So by means attribution. So do you want people to acknowledge that you are the creator anytime they use your work? NC is non-commercial. Do you want to make sure that people don't profit from reusing your work? So you can add a clause to say that you don't want commercial reuse. Non-derivative means that it should be left in its original form. So you don't want people to splice up your work and reuse it. And SA is share alike. So do you want people to have to use the same license to reuse your work? What you get from the back of that is a sliding scale from the bottom to the top, where at the bottom you've got proper old, locked copyright where nobody can do anything without your permission, all the way up through to CC0 as it's dubbed, which is the, basically do what you like with it. You can remix it, you can use it in a commercial product, you can do what you like with it. So you can choose when you publish your work to pick a Creative Commons license to say, I'm okay with you reusing my work. So I publish my stuff on archive.org because I'm saying, well, it's open to anybody to reuse, but I also usually say non-derivs, and so people don't mess with it. But then at the end of the day, you can choose whether you're happy with people to slice and dice it and reuse it. So there's artists and stuff out there that will release whole albums on CC0, so you can reuse their work, and you'll often come up against most of this where you are actually looking for free stock images. So the likes of Pixabay and Pexels, two great websites for finding non-licensed imagery for your blogs, for your promotion of your podcasts, for thumbnails, for whatever you want. I definitely use both of these, and canva.com for generating custom stuff as well. And on the same track as that, you've also got Creative Commons music. So the likes of Jamendo as a website and ccmixter.org have music that you can use. Now, YouTube have also got their audio library that's full of stuff that is free to use with no copyright. But there are plenty of websites out there now that will give you Creative Commons, so you don't even have to acknowledge the author in your work. You can just basically use it. So have a look around. There's plenty of good stuff on Creative Commons that you can include in your podcast. That also includes if you want a theme song at the start, you want a bit of intro music, you want to talk over a bed of music in the background, have a play. It doesn't just have to be your voice and just people only listening to your voice. So that's hosting. Distributing. Now, it's all very well having done all this work, but how are people going to find you? How are people going to know where that you can find your podcast? And this typically there are the standard players in this market. So where we've got our stuff hosted at the moment is on a WordPress website, which I host. And the benefit of having the WordPress is that it then is able to generate, using a plugin, which I'll show you in a minute, it generates the XML that's used with a lot of podcast hosting services. So we just create a new podcast post for every episode, and then we will make use of the PowerPress plugin for WordPress. This means at the bottom of every episode, I can paste in the URL from, here we go, I'll show you. So this is episode 12's panel where I've pasted in the link to the MP3, which is uploaded to archive.org. And that means that I'm not hosting it. I'm not dealing with the bandwidth, so I'm not dealing with any bandwidth costs to do with this. The downside of that does mean that I don't get to see accurately how many people are listening. If you were to only use a podcasting host that was streaming everything for you, they could accurately count the number of streams. So because the work gets shared from here to Apple Podcasts and Google and everybody, we're not, yes, we get metrics from those sites, but there isn't just one place that we can do it from. So the benefit of using that plugin is that it generates the XML feed, so I don't have to know how that all works. And just get out of the way. And yes, so then you've got us, that podcast, that single XML feed I can submit to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, you name it, it's on there. And you just go in and create yourself an account on these services, and then you can just submit your XML. And then anytime you post a new post on WordPress, the XML feed gets updated. These websites poll the feed, and you can then get your new episodes out to people's podcast players. So yeah, it's good. It's good and it's simple, and I'm not having to pay, apart from the WordPress hosting, I'm not paying for anything to generate my host and distribute my podcasts. So in summary, that's the podcast that you've done and that you've recorded and that you've published and that you've distributed. So really you are at a point where you can get your word out there. So record it on something that you own, doesn't have to be expensive. Upload it to archive.org, possibly through Auphonic to clean it up. And then using a WordPress plugin, you can generate the XML and get it out there. Now, to show you an extreme version of this, I participated in the oddly titled NaPodPoMo, which is a mirror of the National Novel Writing Month, NaNoWriMo, which happens every November. And the goal is you record one podcast episode every day for the month of November, in the same way that you're meant to write, is it 10,000 words a day or something like that? You have to write sort of a quantity of your novel every day in November and in NaNoWriMo. So NaPodPoMo means that suddenly this barrier of all these things that you have to do suddenly get keenly felt when you're actually being asked to produce one post a day. So what I did was came up with this very simple way of doing this. Now the screenshot on the right is still on my phone actually, which is the number of apps that I was using to actually have this workflow that I've just described actually on my mobile device. So in the top left there is the voice memos, so it's streamlined so that you can actually get it going. So the voice recorder, doesn't matter what it is, you just need something to capture your voice. And then I moved the export of that into files. So Apple finally got round to actually having a file system on their devices. So I've shared that file, and then I could then edit it in GarageBand on the phone. Now GarageBand just allowed me to put the intro music and the outro music onto the audio that I just recorded in voice memos, and I didn't really do much more editing. It was literally stream of consciousness thinking for those episodes. I was able to, Auphonic have an I/O setup, so I was able to actually clean the audio. And one of the things with Auphonic is that you can actually get it to publish as part of, once it's cleaned up, you can get it publishing into archive.org for you. So that made that easier. And then I've got the WordPress app on my phone as well. So I was able to then create the post to then take the MP3 link from archive.org and do it. So literally I was at a conference during November that year when I did it. I think it was 2019. And I was able to do the whole end-to-end podcast production just by talking into my phone and then using a few apps. And I could actually get a podcast published without being in front of a big computer. So it is possible. And again, the reason I'm mentioning NaPodPoMo, because it forced me to look at my production workflow and go, actually, this could be a lot simpler. And it can be that simple. So just practice. GarageBand is, I mean, I wasn't using it on an iPad, but it is very simple to be able to just drag things in and get things suited. So that's podcasts. And I'm now going to move across to the world of video, because clearly we are increasingly being bombarded with apps. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the video apps, be it Instagram Reels, be it TikTok, be it Twitter, still try to keep up with that, but nobody really uses it. I mean, even LinkedIn tried to put stories and stuff on, trying to get their foot in the door with video. But the first bit of video production that I'm going to talk about is a bit of, I did a lot of video production for internal company projects, so town hall updates, that kind of thing. So what I was doing was taking presenters, putting them in front of a camera, recording them talking to camera, and then obviously that means you are left with a set of video files that you then have to edit afterwards. So that's putting more effort after your capture process. Now the benefit of just going live using one of these apps or streaming on any of these services is that you don't have to think about editing, but you do have to do a lot more of the prep up front about what you're going to talk, unless you're happy that you're just trying to present yourself as a personality and you'll I suppose it's a bit like the analogy of these days trying to find a recipe with on a food blog website, and you have to read 60 words about the grandma's backstory before you actually get to the method and the and the stuff. It depends how much you want your audience to have to fight for the content that you're trying to get across. The more prep that you do beforehand tends to translate into a more succinct output at the end of it. So with this kind of video production, initially I was doing the editing offline, and rather than broadcasting it live. So it's a case of the tools that we've been using for this are things like, so taking the editing and the recording, depends on how you capture the recording, but the editing side of it, you can do an awful lot with Open Broadcast Studio. In fact, tonight's presentation and quite a lot of the other Tech Nottingham staff are aware and use this all the time. It's free to use, it's brilliant, you can contribute to the project, it's open source, and it allows you to take video sources and just broadcast them or record them locally. I mean, you can just do start recording, you don't have to be streaming to use OBS. It's a great way of doing screen captures for demonstrating what you've done with software or how you go through a process. Certainly I've used it for that a number of times. So OBS is good for capture as well as streaming live. And even those cases where I was using, so say I was recording a presenter who was doing slides, I would do similar to what I'm doing tonight, where you would choose whether the presenter was in shot or not by creating scenes in the bottom left hand side of my current screen. You can create a scene and then transition to different things, so I can switch back to me as a presenter in screen and all that. So I'm not having to edit that in a editing software afterwards. So again, the more that you do up front, the less you have to do later, but the more planning you have to do up front. Secondly, in terms of free tools, highly recommend DaVinci Resolve as a video editor. Yes, everyone will talk about Final Cut Pro on the Mac, which is a paid app, or Adobe's Premiere as two industry standard apps. Yes, they are, but DaVinci's in Blackmagic Design, who make DaVinci Resolve, are clearly trying to upsell their hardware. So if you get hooked into the video making industry, they sell lots of devices that will actually help you process and edit audio and color correct it and all the rest. But it's expensive bits of kit. But their video editor is free and is brilliant. Now, you may have free ones on your machine, like iMovie on a Mac or on an iOS device, or something bundled with your machine. But yeah, DaVinci Resolve is good. There is a simpler sort of cut. You can just drag clips together rather than having to get deep into offline timeline editing concepts. But it's certainly worth having a look at if you're going to be looking at video production. So in terms of publishing and distributing, there's obviously YouTube. I mean, can you really talk about video distribution without talking about YouTube? I mean, it is huge and continues to. I mean, the statistics about the number of hours of footage a second that are uploaded is just, it keeps going up and up. I mean, YouTube must be just throwing servers on the end of a data center every day just because they need more storage space. But it's the thing about distribution is that you want to be where your audience is. So an awful lot of people find content on YouTube, and it should definitely be something to consider cross-posting, because it's where people go. And certainly what we do with the live content that we've got, which I'll come to in a minute about streaming, we take a copy of that streamed content and upload it to YouTube for later watching, because then people can find it later. So the one thing I do want to stress, though, is with all of this, it's so easy to just do it without thinking about your content being yours. Do back it up, please, because people's have had their channels, their accounts blocked, deleted, whatever, and then if you've only uploaded it, the final version, to a streaming site or a hosting site, and you haven't got backups, please make sure that you've got your content. And it's another reason for having your own website, is that at least you can have it on your website as well as putting it in front of your audience where you want them. So that then comes on to the final topic, which is streaming, which is even easier these days because of software like Open Broadcast Studio, which we were just talking about. Because once configured, you can go into OBS settings and say, I would like to use this key, which identifies me on Twitch or YouTube Live or Facebook Live, wherever you want to stream, or to multiple services through a proxy, and get online and use the same sort of production tools that I've been showing you, where you can choose video sources, cut and fade between them all, and make it a little bit more professional than just your face in front of a phone camera all the time. So with Azure Live, what we tend to do is use Twitch. But obviously, you can also use YouTube Studio for creating a live event. So there's a balance now. It's about where do you bother putting your work? Yes, you could record your stuff. You could record your podcast. You could record your video, but where do you want to host it? But YouTube Studio is good because you just get the same key out of it. You also get Twitch. Now, we've tried Twitch. Now, obviously, Twitch is primarily around gaming. So there is a question about whether you will find an audience to view your stuff on Twitch. That said, we have found positive crossover where we've actually done a bit of gaming on there as well. So we've done technical content with some shows, and then we've also done a bit of collaborative offline sort of just community building by just having a game and a chat, which has worked really well. Viewing figures aren't huge at the moment, but consistency is often key with a lot of this stuff. Do it for yourself, not for anybody else. If you need a break, don't think, oh, it's Thursday, I've got to publish. It shouldn't be that way around. But we've done Among Us. We've played that in the evening. That's been good fun. We've got people from the tech community in as guests, and then we've gone and played Among Us with them as well. And it's good fun because we just use OBS and get people on the show. Now, the way we do that is using a piece of software called OBS Ninja, which is currently getting renamed, I think. There's a thing at the bottom that's calling VDO. I think they're trying to move away from just being related to OBS. Free software, but what's clever about this is it uses peer-to-peer networking. So you're not going via YouTube to share. It's whoever creates the room, it uses direct connections and your video streams go directly between each other. So it's quite a clever little system. So you create a room and invite guests along. And once those guests are in, they appear as feeds that you can then use in Open Broadcast Studio to then create, like we had the 5 heads there. They were coming in as 5 different streams from people, which we were then able to collect together in OBS and actually make a thing. So OBS Ninja is also on GitHub. You can have a look at the code. It's incredible. I mean, the amount of options on it are ridiculous, but for basic getting video feeds together and or just audio, actually, we've never tried that. We still use clean feed for podcast audio. So OBS Ninja is worth looking at because that's how we do streaming on that. So if you are doing anything across network, there are times then we've got cameras on a phone or across the room. NDI is a technology for streaming video across the network, and NDI plugins exist for OBS, so you can actually stream between machines. And it's worth looking at. What I'll do at the end of this is not only share the slide deck, but I'll also give you a list of all the links that you can just have a sort of explore this at your leisure. The final topic that I'd like to talk about is to do with reusing your content. So it might seem daunting that you might not even be blogging at the moment. So how the heck are you going to think about doing a podcast or vlogging? I don't know if that word's even still in vogue anymore, but me being old. But at the same point is it's how, if the act of thinking about starting a podcast is putting you off even now, how would you even think about doing either of the others? And I've got some tips here because it's something to do with accessibility, which I think some people aren't looking at, and I think you should consider. Firstly, if you're just a blogger, then you've already got a script, if you will. So why not consider just taking that script and recording it? Speak it out. Now, obviously, you're not necessarily going to speak the way that you talk. Certainly, one of the first bits of feedback I got from my first podcast was, it sounds like you are reading this out. It's because I was. It's because literally I was just taking that and I was just going, yeah, this is me reading my introduction because I didn't want to sound like I didn't know what I was talking about. But I then went too far the other way and it didn't sound natural. But then clearly you can just take that and effectively you've got a podcast. So take your blog, read it out, you've got a podcast. But where the reuse comes in a bit more is when you start to think about podcasts, and especially this has come about since I've started using that Descript software to edit, because that podcast, while you're editing it, has been done from speech to text. So suddenly you've got potential blog content there because you could provide the whole transcript, which not only makes it accessible to non-audio users. Also makes it searchable, because suddenly that whole content of your conversation is now on a blog and will be search indexed if you so desire. But also, we found, for promotion's sake, we can make use of little snippets of audio and render them as video for sharing on social media. Now, there's a couple of ways of doing that. Descript has a little audiogram feature which allows you to produce a visual thing. But I did also find a way that the free video conversion software, FFmpeg, does allow you to render a audio waveform as an MP4, which again you could then make use of in a video editing software to actually make into a little snippet to promote it via a visual medium. So that's podcasting. So you get the accessibility of searchable scripts, but you also get the potential for uploading those as small clips in video if you wish. And then finally, you can go all the way down the stack from video, in my opinion. If you were to effectively edit out the audio only, get rid of the pictures, you've got a podcast. And conversely, you can also do the same thing with the script all the way down to a blog via the speech-to-text. There are speech-to-text services that are available via cloud providers now that are reasonably cheap. Auphonic itself, the audio processing software that I recommended earlier, you can connect to a speech-to-text service. So while it's cleaning up your audio, it can also produce a transcript out of it. So there are ways of, again, making this more into your production system. The problem we've got is that speech-to-text is not accurate as much as it is. I mean, obviously there's transcription on this evening's presentation, but it's not always 100% correct. So I do spend quite a bit of time in Descript editing misheard words, but it's good because you actually then get the ability to see the text and shape it at the end. So I would strongly recommend you looking at, if you're going to take the time to share your experience, are there ways of using that same content to find a wider audience without too much effort? Because you could just have the same ideas communicated within a different medium without too much bother. Obviously, that's a lot to take in, because you may not have even considered getting over the first hurdle of just starting. But definitely, there is no need, with the equipment that you've got now, there is no necessary need for you to feel like there's a barrier to this whole mystery, because it's a lot easier than it is. So there are so many ways of getting online. There are so many ways of finding audience. So just have a brainstorm about where you want to actually to go. Find the balance between the amount of effort it takes to do this and you just getting on and sharing that experience. So you might just start small and then think about growing it. And certainly that's what's happened with the team at Azuris Live and also Agile Engineering. We just keep coming up with new ideas that we can do. Remember that it doesn't have to be a successful journey that you're sharing. You are also, your journeys that aren't successful are as equally valuable to people. You have made it out of the other side of that journey, regardless of how it went. Think about all those things that you could help to discuss. Especially, I found that doing solo projects, I sit there and go, but what would anybody want to hear from me? Again, just think about the journeys that you've succeeded on. And then you've got your three main channels that we've talked about tonight: your blogging, your podcasting, and your video channels, all of which are open to you and have free options of doing this without costing you anything apart from your time. And again, if you write down the steps of how you do these things and automate as much as you can, I think you'll find that this is not as scary as you think it may be. And the 6 sort of steps that you may or may not go through are the idea in the first place, planning how you do it, especially if you're going to be collaborating with people or you want to do it on a regular basis. How you record it, and that can be using equipment that you've already got. Some of the collaborative ways that I've talked about that you can collect information, collect data, which has become increasingly useful in virtual events. So that's OBS Ninja for video and Clean Feed for audio. The editing tools that are out there, so Audacity for audio, DaVinci Resolve for video editing, the publishing options where you can actually host in your own blog in a myriad of number of ways, but also I personally use WordPress. And then the distribution, so be that podcast platforms, be that YouTube, be that Twitch. Have a think about where you would go and find that information. But this is all about you becoming an authority on whatever you want, because you should be. I mean, you could just go and answer questions on Stack Overflow if you wanted to answer, sort of do a John Skeet, as Louise reminded me when I was talking through this with her last week. But also, the benefit to doing your own thing is that you're in control of it and you can decide what you do and don't do. So have a go. I would heartily recommend it, and I'm definitely around if you have any questions about this kind of stuff. But yes, so that's a whistle-stop tour of some of the audio and video hacks that I use to make this simple enough to actually be able to think I can pick this up and go with it. And thank you very much.